Hello everybody in Texas Government 2306. Today I want to do a Twitchcast over the Texas Constitution. Now as I'm beginning this, I don't know if I'm going to break it up into two parts. We're going to see. But when I get ready to do this, I'm having to make an assumption that some of you have already had Government 2305 and then some of you may not have had 2305 yet. So I'm going to have to do a little explanation. I won't go overboard so that you'll understand the things that I'm talking about today. I guess the first thing that we've got to talk about is we've got to look at what is a constitution, just in general, okay? And when we look at what is a constitution, then we have to look at why do countries have constitutions? What are the jobs that a constitution is supposed to do and fulfill? Well, I think the very first thing that a constitution does, it establishes what we call the rule of law. In other words, it is going to set out in writing, in some kind of a formal document. It's going to set out this rule of law, which is how a society will be governed, and it determines the laws, the punishments. It sets out citizenship and all those things that we associate with a constitution. But more importantly, I think a constitution establishes the source of power in a country. Where does the power come from? Who has the authority to make decisions, to make the rules, to choose the government? And so when we look at this source of power in a constitution, and you take a constitution like in the United States or in Texas, we have to always look at the concept of popular sovereignty. Now, I want you to look at that word. I always like for you to know, where do words come from? Well, when you look at the word popular, of course you're talking about of the people, populi, okay, from Latin or Greek or some foreign language. And then when you look at the word sovereignty, the first thing I want to point out to you is the word to reign, to rule. And then we talk about the sovereign, the one who rules. And so when we talk about popular sovereignty, and whether it's American government, Texas government, English government, German government, we're talking about the idea of the people are the source of power. Be sure you have that down. The people are the source of power. And that's why in the Texas Constitution and in the United States Constitution, the opening words are, "We, the people." The Texas one says, "We, the people of the state of Texas." So what constitutions do is they set in place laws, rules, authority, and power. And so this is one of your major constitutional principles that you want to keep in mind as you listen to this and you watch videos and you do some reading, etc. And then when you look at a constitution and you look at the principles of the Constitution, you should also be paying close attention to the constitutional principle of check and balance. This is one of the most fundamental principles of democracy. And it's the idea that power, and this is very important, okay? Power must be, and boy is Texas big on this, that power must be divided. The other word you will see a lot is fragmented, which just means to break up. There was a real fear, even when this country was created in the American Revolution, of what was called the concentration of power. And in Texas, for sure, they wanted to make sure that at no one time could one person, one group, grab all the power, which means if they can grab all the power, then they can take power away from you and me. And so this is also called separation of powers. And so when you think about checks and balance, and when you think about fragmenting power, etc., always, 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 and one more time, always associate this with 3 branches of government. When you see the word separation of powers, I want you to automatically go, oops, that's check and balance. And then when you see 3 branches of government, I want you to go, whoops, that's always separation of power. Now, you know check and balance, okay? Check and balance. Let's just do one that everybody knows. You learned this probably since 3rd grade social studies, okay? Congress or the Texas legislature will pass a law. The next part, you know it. Come on, say it out loud. Sitting by yourself at home, say it out loud. I know you can. The president or the governor can then veto that law. See, that is the ultimate example of check and balance. That one branch of government has some power to pass laws, but the governor also has the power to stop that law. So that's where I want to do check and balance because of, the fact that some of you may have had government 05 and some of you may not. So I'm giving you just kind of this brief introduction. So the first thing is that I want you to kind of have this general idea about constitutions, about their purpose, and some of these basic principles. Now remember, ladies and gentlemen, your principles are popular sovereignty. That is a principle. Your next principle is check and balance. So let's take a little breather. And now let's start getting very specific, and let's start talking about the Constitution, Texas Constitution of 1876. This is the last Constitution that was created by the state of Texas. There had been several more before this. Remember, y'all need to remember from 7th grade, y'all, if you went to school in Texas, remember that Texas had been an independent nation. Then we were called the Republic of Texas. Then we were taken over. We were annexed by the United States. So there's a constitution. Then we were in the Confederacy. There's a constitution. And so when we came out of the Civil War, we have this new, the latest constitution that we have had in the state of Texas. Now, the thing that is very interesting about this Constitution is that this Constitution was written as a reaction to Reconstruction. Now, I know that you may not have had History 1 or 2 yet, so let me give you a down and dirty. Reconstruction was the period after the Civil War, and it was the time period when the Northern Union Army, the Union government, totally controlled the defeated Confederacy, of which Texas was a part. And it was in this time period that white Texans, notice the word I'm using there, white Texans lost the right to vote. They lost control of their government. They had no control over their government, none whatsoever. And so once they were able to come back into the Union, and they came back, and they're going to create this Constitution, they are going to make sure that all of the wrongs, all of these things that these white leaders believed had happened during Reconstruction, that it would never, ever, ever, underline never, happen again. That's very important. Because what is going to happen is this Constitution, and I can say this with 2021, under our belt, coming up under our belt, this was written to protect white interest. Think about the time period, 1876, right after the Civil War. The white interest, because it was the whites that were in power, white males to be exact. And so it was the job of the Texas Constitution to protect white interest, particularly in the area of property and politics. They are going to make it, the writers of this Constitution are going to make it very, very hard for a long time. And I will tell you, as we study this class, it's going to be a long time before other groups, women, African Americans, Hispanics, can break into the Texas political system. Now, in order to kind of wrap this up, and I'm going to break this up into smaller Twitchcasts, I think it's just too much to try to put together all at once. I want you to write down what I call the 4 general characteristics. Before we get into anything specific, let's look at the 4 general characteristics of the Texas Constitution. Not constitutions in general, but the Texas Constitution. And there are 4 of these. So let's take a look at them quickly, one at a time. The first one is that the Texas Constitution is N-O-T, capital underline, easily changed. It is an incredibly hard document to change. It is very rigid, and the process for changing the Constitution is very, very difficult. So that's the first thing in general. Now, going hand in hand with this is the second general characteristics. All changes, underline all, in the Texas Constitution. So see, I've already told you it's hard to do, right? Must be done by, look what I'm doing here, all caps, printing neater, adding amendments. There is very little, I mean, it is so little, it's minuscule. There is very little room for any kind of interpretation. There's no room for, we're in the middle of a COVID crisis. Let's try this. No. In Texas, there's no, let's try this. In Texas, you got to write an amendment. You got to vote on the amendment. Then you got to send it to the people to vote on. It is complicated. And what this does, what this number 2 does, leads to number 3. Incredibly detailed. It is detailed to the smallest detail. Remember, there's no interpretation. So if it's not written, we don't do it. If it's not written, as we used to say in East Texas, it ain't done, okay? And because of 1, 2, and 3 here, the 4th one is really important. Because what happens is Texas has to often react to a crisis. In other words, when there is a crisis, we are constantly reacting to the crisis. There is not much forethought into what if. Okay? So these are the major general characteristics. So I'm going to stop this Twitchcast, and then I'll do a second one. So thank you for listening, and we'll move on to the next one. Bye.